So I'm here with Nicole Rollins and Greg Rose. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm I'm doing good.
Doing good. Well, yeah, so there's been a little bit of a snafu because your lovely wife, Siobhan, is supposed to be with us today.
Is a cat lady.
Now, yeah, she's become one with the cats. So,
she's the queen. She's the queen of the cats of Montecito Heights, and
wow,
it's a thing to be, but sometimes it'll get you in trouble.
Man,
so,
what a freaky thing to happen. So just to let everybody know, so Siobhan is going to be joining us in about 20 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes from her hospital bed. She was scratched by a cat last night in the middle of the night and admitted into the emergency room, or brought to the emergency room and admitted into the hospital because of her hand had swollen because of the scratch by the cat. What a strange thing to happen.
Loving
right?
cats can be dangerous.
Yeah. Wow. What an odd thing. But so we're gonna, Greg's gonna help us with that. Greg's gonna show us some of her work, and then after we see some of her work, then we're gonna go and talk to her in the hospital room. So, but she's here. Hi, Siobhan.
Oh, but she's here.
Nice. Yeah, fantastic. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started, and we can talk about Greg's work. So Greg is also in the LA Stories show as well, and I've been following Greg's work for I don't know how long, like 25 years. I've been a big fan of it. Some of the things that I really enjoy about it is there's a very kind of minimal aesthetic, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Greg. This is how my interpretation. There's a kind of minimal aesthetic, almost design qualities in them, and I mean that in a very positive way.
Did you just use the D word?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. Some people do though, but I definitely don't. But I would say that there's almost like a minimal aesthetic, very active negative space that's being used in it. But also very painterly and also like very involved in kind of the formal issues of painting as well. So I think of Greg as like a very contemporary painter's painter.
Ah.
So yeah,
I
have nothing. I love your work.
That's one of those. The greatest thing you can ever get is to be called a painter's painter if you're a painter.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's the kind of thing I figured nobody's going to say that about me, but so it's kind of nice.
I just did. Yeah. I mean, and like I said, a contemporary painter's painter, I mean, if we go back, 30 or 40 years, we say, oh, well, Diebenkorn is a painter's painter, but, I think of Greg Rose as a contemporary painter's painter.
Wow.
So, there we go. And I've seen your work transform over the last 25 years as well, going, where I think it seems like a lot of the subject matter stayed the same. A lot of the influences has been consistent as well. Maybe these are some things that you could expand on, Greg.
Yeah, so actually when I first kind of got out of grad school, the thing that I kind of focused on was basically, I guess you'd call it suburban landscape. And I was sort of interested in having this approach to landscape that was more like a populist kind of approach instead of like going up into the mountains and painting a sublime landscape. I kind of felt like most people experience nature just walking down a road and looking at somebody's landscaping in their front yard or, in flower arrangements and stuff like that. So all my paintings kind of focused on that. I would go around the neighborhood and photograph people's front yards, and then this is before digital photography. I would get prints back from the developer, and I would paint out all the architecture, and then that would be my sketch. And it was sort of I thought there was something very LA about it, in that all the landscape in LA in landscaping is kind of, all the plants are generally from somewhere else, just like the population, just like people. I mean, we all come here. I keep meeting people that say they grew up here and they've been Angelenos all their life, but you know, most of us actually came from somewhere else, and we came here to start all over again. And you see that in the plants too.
That was my next.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Greg. I was just going to say that was my next question about that. You're. I think we all notice this as people that have migrated to Los Angeles, that the first thing that you notice, it's got like that everything is very suburban and everything is very manicured and very controlled. There's like a very controlled aspect to nature. You know, I think Tim Burton in Edward Scissorhands did such a great job of kind of like playing with this whole idea of like the very typical kind of like suburban LA, you know, San Fernando Valley, Orange County type neighborhood, you know, Inland Empire.
Yeah. And for me, I think a part of the appeal was as a painter, as an abstract painter, I was really interested in doing kind of very, you know, kind of Abex-y kind of action painting. But at the same time, I found that I was very much of an editor, whereas like the real Abex painter makes the mark and then walks away from it, you know, and it's like, I would like make a mark and then go, oh, I can make that a little bit better. And so I was always kind of like editing. and I at one point after I graduated I went to Claremont, I stumbled on like a book of Ikebana, and I thought, this is perfect. It's like, because it's all about the arrangement of nature, how nature flows. It's not like, you know, you look in a European flower arrangement, it's just like a bunch of flowers put into one vase and it's just explosion of color. But in Japanese floral arrangement, it's more about patterns and you know, the way things look in nature, the asymmetry and all that. Yeah. And so I like that, but I also like the fact that it's actually super organized. Like there's all these patterns and diagrams for how to arrive at this kind of asymmetry and this kind of look of nature. And it's done also without irony. And at the end of the 90s, that was kind of a thing, you know. It's like one of my painters that I was really looking at a lot was Jonathan Lasker, and I loved his work, but there was this kind of irony in it. And I didn't want to make I don't want to be an ironic painter. I didn't want to have it be a kind of inside joke or whatever. I like the idea that there's this order to chaos and it's not an ironic thing. And I like that about Ikebana and about just garden design in general. So I focused a lot on this stuff, but at some point I kind of got bored with it, and I found myself hiking in the mountains, and I remember looking at the landscape and just thinking, God, everywhere I look, there's a painting. And I just thought, you know, I'm in love with this. And so I'm just going to come as much as I can. And so I focused on the trees because those are the most interesting thing for me. And what it was kind of like, at first, I just thought the first thing I need to do is just collect resource material. So I kind of would go and photograph all these trees. And that became a kind of thing in and of itself. I'm still doing it. And although I'm using the resource material to make paintings now, that project of documenting the trees and continuing to document them and going back and what do they look like now? And that's become a kind of even bigger project that I don't know if it's art or what it is, but it's just this thing that I'm kind of obsessed with now. And so, you know, I'm always trying to figure out how to tie that in to art, or how do I present that as art? But I don't know if it really matters. It's just this thing that's going to occupy me for the rest of my life. So,
well, it sounds to me like it's all part of the process. You know, it's all part of like your thought process. The whole idea of like even documenting these things is part of the way that you're thinking, and now that thinking goes back into your art making process. You know, but which kind of leads me to another question that I have is, you know, I know that you've always been very involved as a fan of music and all different types of music. how do you feel that maybe that filters into your work as well?
Kind of doesn't.
So
I mean,
do you feel like they're completely separate?
yeah, I mean, I haven't really figured out how to do that. Um, I'm probably more into music than I am into painting, but I'm a painter and I'm not a musician. But as far as art appreciation, I'm probably way more into music than I am into anything else.
Yeah.
And so I listen to a lot and I research it and I go look for it and I'm constantly finding it. And I'm kind of an obscurist. I look for things I haven't already heard, and I'm always finding it. And it's just an endless. It's kind of amazing. I wish I had that kind of passion for painting or visual arts. Like I'm trying to get back into it because I used to be, obsessed with looking at art magazines and going to galleries and museums and stuff. But as I've kind of come into my own as an artist, I've kind of, in a way, pushed everything else out. Does that ever happen to anybody out there?
Yeah.
It's like, I've known musicians like this. I'll come up to them and I'll ask them all these questions like about music and about this band and that band. And they kind of like, they're bored with it. They're bored with the whole conversation, right? Because they've come into their own. They know what kind of musician they are and they know that what they're doing. They're not that interested in what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that kind of, that's why I brought that up actually, because I can kind of see a very musicality to your work. I mean, I think of like the negative space in your work as almost like the space in between notes, that kind of like, where maybe a note is drawn out or that there's space in there. And that kind of play between abstraction and representation as having, I see your work as very musical, and when we started talking and having that discussion, I started making the connection even more. I think of, like a lot of jazz musicians, and kind of improv the same way as you're putting this together.
I've been listening to a lot of microtonal music lately, and that's a whole different thing too. It's like how you mix a color. A lot of people just use paint right out of the tube. But I love mixing color. I love like putting different colors together to arrive at some unique color that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And I think that's, when as I'm listening to microtonal music, that's sort of what it's like. It's like these notes between the notes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that opens up things in a whole new way for any kind of composition.
Yeah, I mean, because, we were talking about this last week, and the GOAT is on right now. He just mentioned Bartok, and I can totally see that, there's like dissonance in the chords, dissonance in the chords, but there's also harmony in the chords, and all those things, like, the dissonance help round it out the same way that like a complementary color doesn't necessarily fit. But at the same time, you need that as part of the chord to round out and make it bigger, So
you're getting really obscure now. You're even losing me. I don't.
Oh, sorry.
Let's move on.
I think of these things like again when I see your work, the way everything kind of fits together in that way, and also like. Some of the areas are very flat, they're in the way that they're painted, and other areas you're building up texture, and form, and it just creates a very, to me, it creates a very like visually pleasing work, and to me that's kind of a bottom line. I want to look at paintings that are engaging in that way.
There was a point where I got really into photography. I think it was like maybe my senior year in high school. And then the next couple of years I went to community college where I actually was focused really on photography. And I even thought I was going to become like a photographer, that was going to be my art form. And one of the things that phase kind of taught me was how to think about formalism. Because you have this limited little space and you're figuring out what goes into that space. And so you're thinking about always about relationships, like relationships
Yeah.
of different values, relationships of different colors, of textures, of positive, negative space. You know, it's all within that space, and you can shift it and change everything. And
Yeah.
that when I started looking through a camera lens, that's when I really started to figure out composition. And it should be like a prerequisite class
Yep.
for any painter
Yep.
that you should
Yep.
take. But there's always been this friction between photographers and painters for some reason. I don't know.
Just like
But
just like graphic designers and painters, you know, there's always that kind of friction as well. And I mean, we're all there's so much in what, you know, we're talking about the formalism of it, and that language there's so much overlap in what we do that I think I find it hard to separate them. And why even separate them? Why not kind of like play up the differences and also play up the similarities? It's all part of a bigger dialogue and, you know, interest that we all have. So what the hell? Why not?
maybe at this point I should mention that my father was an architect, and right before I started going to Claremont, I remember having this conversation with my father. My father and I had always had like an adversarial relationship, but we didn't get along. But he said this one thing that kind of struck me. He said he really felt like he had sort of really coming into his own with his work at this particular point. And it sounded like something an artist would say. And I just never thought of him as an artist. I always thought of him as the guy who brings home the bacon. You know, but when you study art history, you're always studying architecture. And I don't know why I never thought of him. He studied with this architect named, I think his name was Fay Jones, or it was this guy who did these cathedrals of glass. And he's kind of famous for that. He himself was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright. So my father is actually in this lineage, you know, so he was a very successful architect on the Monterey Peninsula. And his stuff is all over Pebble Beach and Green Meadows and Carmel Valley and the Highlands area. But it made me kind of rethink like what he was as an influence to me as an artist, because I always thought of my mother, who was this French bipolar alcoholic who killed herself when I was 16. You know, she's the one who was sort of, that's where my art genes came from. You know, and then here's my father talking about art in a way that I thought, you know, I should think about that and what design is to me. And so when I went into Claremont, I kind of went in with this idea of making art that has something to do with architecture. And so that was, it was kind of like I had this sort of process that was like role playing, where I would sort of pretend that I was an architect. Like, there's this famous interview with, what's his name? Geary, where he kind of explains that, you know, when he was in architecture school, he just hung out with the painters. And when he would make like a project, you know, he would think of it as a painting. And I thought, well, if he can pretend that he's a painter, you know, I can pretend I'm an architect. So I had this approach where I would have these sort of imaginary clients, and you know, I had to work with some kind of you know, with these different people, and there was always compromise, and these different things would happen, and the result was the painting. And it was just an abstract painting with a bunch of blobs of paint, you know, or essentially the vocabulary of 20th century mark making and abstraction. You know, there's a grid, the, you know, color field, the expressionist blob, whatever. All these just became parts that you would go to like Home Depot and buy this stuff and to make something like a architecture out of. So that's where we were sort of at the end of the century in the 90s. We're sort of in this sort of fin de sile moment where, well, okay, well, what's next? And so I just kind of looked at all the parts and I thought, well, these are the parts. I'm going to put the parts together to make something. And so that was sort of my approach. Going from there to the Ikebana, it kind of made a little bit more sense. I thought this is something, it's sort of the same thing, because I'm approaching it very systematically, and it is about this relationship between things that happen by design and things that happen
naturally.
Naturally. So
Yeah, you know, it's funny. The movie that you're talking about, it's Sketches of Frank Gehry. With I remember that interview with Frank Gehry because I love. It's one of my favorite movies, by the way. I think that's the one that you're referencing. But anyway, no, this is all really interesting, and of course, as a fan of your work, like I don't always feel like we're able to have this discussion about it, but I really enjoyed it. And a lot of things that crossed my mind, when I'm looking at your work, in some ways you're confirming for like what I'm saying, but in some ways you're kind of denying the music part. I was expecting for sure. Oh yeah, Greg's gonna be able to like talk about music and his interest and how that
I
part
could
of
talk
this as
about
well.
music. I could talk about music till the end of time, but it's like I don't know how to really talk about it in relation to my work. I mean, I listen to it as I'm working, but I don't know.
I don't think that you can listen to that music and not have it filter into what you're doing visually, and maybe you're just not aware of the connection, but I think there's a connection there. And we're going to continue this conversation.
Should I actually point the camera at some artwork, or
that would be let's go ahead and do that.
Here, I'm gonna just take this thing here, and does this work? Like how? Maybe I should do this. It's gonna reverse it.
Greg, maybe you should be paying your cameraman more to do this for you.
Jeez. So this is
awesome.
Usually how I start off is I go up in the mountains. I take a picture of a tree. Oh, this one, by the way, is in that painting at the Brenau, right?
Oh, so, yeah.
This is the original gouache version of it that I did. I usually start off with a little. It's like about 13 inches square, and I've got a whole bunch of these, and it's kind of like it's just an endless thing. I always think of it as like a headshot. Like later on, I kind of put them together to make something more of a more of a staged kind of composition that has a little bit more of a narrative quality. Like, I don't paint like eyeballs on the trees or give them arms or anything, but they are sort of anthropomorphic in the sense that there's something going on there. Like, what's the relationship between this tree and that tree? And I just try to subtly kind of create that situation, but not be too pronounced about it, so that the viewer can just kind of make something out of it. And the way I kind of do this is I have these like sort of flashcards where I have information on the back about which tree looks good next to it on the left, which tree looks good to it on the right.
Wow.
So I'll do stuff like that where I'll kind of figure it out, and then it becomes this composition. And I've got like tons of them because I've got like really hundreds of these trees documented. I have their GPS locations, so I know exactly where to go to refine them. And like we just had this humongous fire. I haven't said anything about that. There's this, it's called the Bobcat fire that burned like well over 100 acres and a lot of the area that I normally would go hiking. And so these trees don't look the same anymore. And that's a part of my documentation, is to now go up there and document them in their new state. And a lot of them look dead, but I don't think they all are. It's just the pine needles have like died because of this intense heat and dehydration as the flames go through. But you can see trees where the trees really did get completely burned. They're completely black, even the pine needles. And so I'm looking at some of these trees and thinking some of them might make a comeback, but this is just all part of the project. I'll be doing this for the next, 10, 15 years, documenting these.
Wow.
So anyways, rushing ahead because I don't want to take up Siobhan's time. Lately, I've been doing compositions that are more like this, where I'm breaking up that horizon line. I always refer to this as the stage. It's just a place, basic, generic kind of place where I can put the tree and it can do its little act. But lately, I've been breaking it up and doing kind of overlaps to kind of create a sense of how we actually experience things, which is over time and space. It's not, we have these sort of, in our minds, the memories of events and things kind of always overlapping with one another. And And so I kind of want it to be, these little narratives to be in a way kind of more like that, sort of like not just an event, but an event that's been sort of twisted into mind. So I've been kind of doing that and bringing a little bit more kind of ways of messing up the mark and not being so perfect. So that's a kind of a new thing that I really enjoy. Sure. Is kind of getting it really nice and then screwing it up and then going back into it. There's one.
It's just a different kind of editing.
Yeah. This is what I've been doing kind of lately. They're a little bit more kind of graphic designy and also kind of architectural. Sorry, there's not much light on these, but I'm bringing in sort of architectural elements like different kinds of geometric marks and stuff to kind of work with the tree. And it's just, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's just, I'm trying to create a kind of relationship between this organic thing and a more designed kind of thing. And I like this idea, like Frank Lloyd Wright, this idea that architecture should really fit into the landscape.
Yeah.
And I think of this like as a kind of this relationship between sort of man's designed kind of quality and the organic sort of reality of the nature, and how to make these things kind of work together in some kind of harmonious way. And it's kind of just fun to kind of work in this more sort of, I guess, sort of an abstract kind of way.
Yeah.
And I'm just really enjoying kind of working on these. I'm not sure, these are all designed on the computer and then I've printed them up. I don't have a big adult printer. I have like just a little home printer that I just sort of make little sections and then tape them together to make something look like big enough that I want it to look at it. But I don't know if I'm going to do these as like paintings, as gouache paintings, or just to do them as like prints. So I'm still kind of working that out. But that's sort of where I'm at now.
Wow, very cool.
Maybe I should look at Siobhan's stuff now.
Okay.
Can we do that, or?
Yeah, Greg, thanks so much. It was really, I loved seeing kind of like, again, the evolution of your work. I think it's been really nice. So I want to thank you for that.
Right on. Thank you.
It's really nice.
Yeah,
This is
and,
really
and
cool.
I've enjoyed.
Greg, in the comments, just to keep you updated, a lot of folks are popping in and saying hello to you, but also commenting on your dedication and obsession with documenting the particularities of these trees. So I think people are really interested in your process. So
yeah,
thanks for sharing that. I think folks have been really interested. So make sure you go visit Greg's website and see what he's been working on and keep up to date on that.
Right on.
Yeah. And so now Greg's going to show us some of Siobhan's paintings. And then this is what's going to happen. So what we have to do, because of the limitations of Instagram TV Live, is that we're going to look at her paintings, we're going to stop, and then we've got to reconnect with Siobhan, who is in the hospital, to be able to talk with her. So I hope everybody, and there's Siobhan right there saying bravo. So I hope everybody will be able to join us again. So the connection will be just a few seconds before we shut off and then we start back up again. So anyway, so these are some of Siobhan's paintings. And this is in Siobhan's studio space. And these are some of the, I don't know if these are newer ones or if they're older or.
This is
maybe
one of her more recent paintings.
Okay. Awesome.
So there's that. There's let's see. I'm going to go down here. This is a series she did earlier, and these are just
cool.
parts of a series that is pretty expansive. There's a lot more to it. She does these different bodies of work that are kind of all related, and part of it has to do with the pigments that she uses. This is a kind of a red series. The other one you saw was yellow. This is a painting that hasn't finished yet. and she keeps complaining that she hasn't finished it yet. But she will finish it.
Very and I'm really anxious to talk to Siobhan, because we're going to be able to find out more about the narrative and the narrative qualities that are in here, and the specifics about them as well. But they're a lot of them are narratives, kind of dystopian environments involving children, and children and animals. And I know because some of my kids appear in these paintings as models. She used like our kids as models for this. Anyway, but I'm very. Oh, Siobhan said, "Go to the wall, Greg."
Oh, okay.
There we go. Oh, I think we're losing a little bit of connection. So Siobhan's saying that these are some newer ones that we're looking at over here. Yeah, I see Greg. Oh, and your kids too. Very cool. There we go.
Sorry, I got lost.
There we go.
So these are the most recent pieces.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I love how these are progressing. Just as paintings, I see like even the way that she's building the paintings are even changing as well. So this is really interesting. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, these are really beautiful. Very, very cool. Wow, now I really want to see this in person. Yeah, really nice. Excellent.
So, Siobhan,
Very
is there
cool.
anything else you wanted me to show?
Siobhan's killing it.
Well, we go for walks, like in the park here. We live right next to a park. And whenever somebody's walking a dog, Siobhan goes, "Do you mind if I photograph your dog?" So she's got all these dog photographs that she works from.
Are people pretty receptive?
Well,
to
I
that,
think
or
it's
do they think
interesting.
she's kind of creepy?
Sorry?
I said, are people receptive to Siobhan photographing the dogs, or do they think she's kind of creepy?
I always kind of like fall back a little bit because I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea. But people love having their dogs photographed, especially when she says that she's an artist and she paints dogs, or you know, I know somehow they just trust her. If I were to go and ask, you know, if I could photograph your dog, they'd probably be a little nervous.
Right.
She pulls it off somehow.
Very cool. Hey, Greg, what we're going to do now, thank you so much for doing that. We're going to talk to Siobhan in the hospital, and from her hospital bed. So
right on.
To do that, we've got to stop this one, and we're going to start another one. So we'll be back in about 3 minutes, okay? So I hope everybody can come back and join us again in just a couple minutes, all right?
Very cool.
Okay, thanks so much, you guys.
Bye.
We'll talk to you really soon.